So the first up, we have David Buruchara. He is a sophomore this year at from Nairobi, Kenya. He is majoring in finance at the Stephen Ross School of Business, and this past summer, he worked with a business called the Saman Foundation in Bihar.
Different folder. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Buruchara. Fortunately, same name. So today I'll be speaking based on my research that I did in northern India and the state of Bihar. And I was investigating the tools used by Saman Foundation, a social business to enhance the entrepreneurial skills of rickshaw pullers in Bihar, India. And before I begin, you heard I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, and one habit of Kenyans, if you may have heard Kenyans give speeches, particularly politicians, is that a majority of their speech is spent on protocol, observing protocol. And today I'm probably going to beat the world record for observing protocol to the shortest time possible. So I'd just like to officially thank the donor and the Center for South Asian Studies for this wonderful opportunity, just providing me this opportunity to go to India. My first summer being here at the university is just priceless. And this picture is just probably my glorified tourist experience. This was early morning in Ranthambore National Park. This was after my research. Just went on a bit of a tour, and so that's that. So a bit about myself. Who am I? As you may have heard, I'm Kenyan, international student. Arrived here, this is my second year, so I arrived here last year, 2012. And this little symbol signifies, it's the logo for my previous international schooling school that I came to just prior to Michigan. And I guess it just signifies my background, educationally speaking. I've grown up in international schools, so I've been exposed to a lot of cultures, and that's kind of shaped my own personality and values and ideals, just being exposed to those various cultures. And I usually get the question, why do you speak English so well? So I thought you were from Canada. So that's what caused that. And I'm studying business, second year student. And secondly, you might be asking, why India? Why did I decide to apply? I'll start off with talking about my interests. So as was said, I'm studying business, finance, and strategy. And the reason why I chose to study business is because I took a gap year after my high school experience. It's kind of forced gap year. We end the term in December. The calendar is different, so I had to wait 9 months. And I got interested in just the new ideas, innovative things that people were doing, especially in developing countries, especially to do with solving the issue of poverty. And a lot of that, especially in my own country, was through business. More so, I got interested in social business, entrepreneurship, which is, business for good with a mission of maintaining that good, which I'll talk about a little more. And my future plans, impact, invest, in corporate social responsibility. So I want to delve into that field myself once I graduate. So when I heard about the opportunity in India, which was in Professor Mir's History 101 class that I took that semester, and I remembered that during my gap year, I'd spent a lot of time just researching on various social business ventures around the world, and India came up a lot. And that just really intrigued me, the fact that this was a possible opportunity to go and, learn a bit more from that. And this quote, necessity is the mother of invention. And I don't know if you've heard that before. And this is a quote that really speaks to me in the sense of my interest, interested in new ideas, innovative things. And I realized that most of these things come about through necessity. And we know a country like India has been through many challenges, but has overcome those. And comparing it to a country like mine, which might be still further back in progress, developmentally speaking, it would be great to maybe go and learn from them, learn from what they've been doing in India. And I saw this as an opportunity, thus I applied. So yeah, potential lessons to learn from progress made, and how to overcome challenges, adapt principles back home in Kenya. So that was kind of what got me to apply. Okay, so Saman Foundation. So Saman Foundation is the organization I was working with. Saman Foundation is Saman, which means dignity in the Hindi, as the slogan, hold your head high. And they are a social business, which I'll talk about more. It was established in 2007 in the city of Patna, in northern India, a state called Bihar. Bihar happens to be the poorest state in India, and is, behind, economically and developmentally. So it stands out in that case. And the reason how I found this organization was through the founder, Mr. Irfan Alam, who's pretty famous just because of what he did with this organization, which has really put Bihar in the news, in the media, as a hopeful state, that much can be done in this state as well. So that's one of his famous quotes: "If you aspire to live in a happier world, you must empower those living on the margins of society." And so he's the founder. He's a pretty young guy. He's in his 30s right now. He's currently at Harvard doing a master's in public administration. And Saman works with some of the 1.5 million rickshaw pullers in Bihar. And their main objective is to organize the entire sector and transform rickshaw pullers into an empowered and dignified workforce, not only in Bihar, but hopefully throughout India. So, and again, so we're hearing this social business term. And basically, Muhammad Yunus coined the term social business, and he defines it as a non-loss, non-dividend company designed to address a social objective. The profits are used to expand the company's reach and improve the product service. In my own words, I would say that a social business is basically a business that uses profit as a means to reach a social end. So the profit is basically the sustainability part, and what's used to reinvest it back into meeting that social objective. So you could just use that as a definition. And that's what Saman does, basically. So all their profits are reinvested into their mission. In fact, none of the staff take any dividends from that, which I found really inspiring based on how much they commit to it. And the focus are obviously the individual rickshaw pullers. And there's a specific focus on the individual rickshaw puller. They tend to do as much as they can to meet all their needs. And this is one of the rickshaw pullers under the Saman program. You can see he's wearing the uniform, and he's got an ID tag, which they provide. And so basically what they do in summary is, you will understand also through my findings, is they give access to the rickshaw pullers who are initially basically isolated from society, financially, socially, and we'll see that as we go along. But what they do is basically give them resources, access to resources that allow them to connect to various parts of society in order to uplift themselves out of, their conditions of poverty. And also to connect them to just have the government as the banks where they get loans, as I'll talk about education, companies that they actually work with that help them increase their income, to health needs and services, and to give them a product to use for their own businesses, and to connect them to basically the rest of society. So that's what Saman does in, I guess, general. This is their model. It's pretty complex. I won't spend too much time on that. But basically, where I'll be focusing on, where my research was focused on was on the outer, this third ring, in terms of the developing entrepreneurial skills. So they kind of look at it in a way of giving them the most basic needs first, and they've developed a model whereby they feel that there are certain things that they need to have first, such as identification and official verification, which they lack, just in order to access, public services like governmental services, and through that can open so many avenues. So it's basically opening avenues through this various things. So that's basically their model in general. Anyway, my research aim was to investigate the tools used to enhance entrepreneurial skills of the rickshaw pullers. And first of all, what is an entrepreneur? This is one thing I had to, I guess, ask myself before we play around with this term. And an entrepreneur, as commonly referred to in Investopedia, is an individual who, rather than working as an employee, runs a small business and assumes all the risk and reward of a given business venture, idea, or good or service offered for sale. So this was what I was using as the basis of, looking at the rickshaw pullers. Are they entrepreneurs already before they go into the Saman program, or do they become entrepreneurs? And that was one thing I had to find out initially as I went about my research. And so the current conditions of rickshaw pullers. So this was basically what I had to go about, finding out before I could actually conduct what I was willing to find. So we have 10 million rickshaw pullers in operation countrywide, estimated in India, the mostly north and east region. Each actually supports an average of five. So that's potentially 50 million people supported by the industry. That's a lot of people you're talking about. And this is actually what attracted Mr. Alam, the founder, into trying to work with these people just because of the potential impact. Contributes 30% to urban transport, and major cause for road accidents because of low traffic sense. And in Bihar, particularly, 1.5 million rickshaw pullers, and most are seasonal migrants. So seasonal migrants, basically, Bihar is a very agricultural-based state. So most of the rickshaw pullers who work in the city, Patna particularly, usually migrate to the cities during the, when it's not harvest or sowing season. So that's basically, more than half of the year they're in the cities trying to find more income to support their families. So because of this, they survive on bare minimum resources just because of their migrant nature. It's very easy to lose track of them. So the government can't really keep track of them, and sometimes they seem invisible, you could say, because of, they just keep moving around. And because of that, they also can't really form any permanent like infrastructure or set up in a long-term place. They have to, everything is short-term, basically. So that's difficult for them. And what are the arising issues because of being seasonal migrants? So the rickshaw, working with the rickshaw is the last means of livelihood, and hence they're migratory, not by choice but by circumstance, why they work with the rickshaws. And we said the migratory nature leads to unstable livelihood, inadequate urban housing, which I'll show you some pictures after that. So yeah, so these are some pictures that I took when we went out into the field, just to drive around the city and just see what is the actual problem at hand. And we have a lot of rickshaw pullers who basically sleep on the side of the roads. And so that's one of their camps. These are some guys from the office. And this was actually a government housing structure that was put up 10 years ago to house these rickshaw pullers, as they noticed this was, they were very visible on the streets. So it's very small compared to the number of rickshaw pullers available. And it's basically just a roof to cover from the rain. And I'll just move swiftly through that because of time. Okay, so these are the rising issues. So they have no local standard franchising rights in independent India, financially excluded, no access to savings, financial devices. There's lack of education, health risks, and the costs are high because of their lack of source of income, and no verification, which contributes to social ills. And so basically the rickshaw pullers, the way they obtain rickshaws is that they rent out rickshaws from fleet owners, and they have to pay an up to 25% daily wage that goes to paying for the rent of these rickshaw pullers. And also, one thing is they don't have any source of savings, any storage space because of their migrant nature. So a lot of their income is exploited because they keep their savings with the fleet owners. And that's just one of the fleets. So methods of data collection. So conducted interviews with the Saman staff in head office, and also at their field site, which is the rickshaw park, and also visited several rickshaw yards around the city to get the overall general condition. Observed the initiating phase of the Saman program, and also had a personal interview with a Saman staff member called Santos, as we will see. And so this was basically based on the limitations I had. Saman was very busy at the time. The government is adopting their business model, which is a very good thing, but because of that, it was hard to get the translator to go out into the field. So this is as much as I could do. So those are a few images. So that's the park. This is the park manager. So those are some of the rickshaw pullers. And this was, they're giving their loans for their rickshaws at the bank. So that's with the bank managers. And so findings. So I based my findings on, cut my findings into two main topics. So the first one was, based on the definition of an entrepreneur. So they're supposed to run a small business. How does Saman Foundation enhance running of the business? These are the entrepreneurial skills. And secondly, how do they assume all the risk and reward of a given business venture? What does Saman play a role in this for the rickshaw pullers? So the first one. So I split it into subdivisions of ownership and control. And this is what I saw was the focus of Saman Foundation, was based on what they try to develop with the rickshaw pullers is to, so they basically sell the rickshaws to the rickshaw pullers. So as I said, it's the ownership of an asset through sale of rickshaws to rickshaw pullers. And what they do is they set up a savings bank account, and they get special loans from the government in order to provide them the rickshaw pullers, and they pay monthly installments to pay for these rickshaw pullers. So eventually they own the rickshaw pullers at the end of the day. So it's an asset. And in addition to that, in order to get a loan, you need identification. So the ownership of the asset is the main part of running the small business more effectively, because they keep the income. And also, just to give an example, Santos, who was one of the guys who went through the program. So before Saman, we can see that he had a daily wage of 150 rupees, and he had to rent. He had lack of savings because he had no savings account. And eventually, because of being on the program, he was able to own an asset, and because of having the account, he was able to allocate 40 rupees to his savings, and thus allow him to have enough money to send his children to school, provide better health for his family, and increase daily income to 350 rupees based on the new product that Saman founded, gave them, the rickshaw. And another based on the ownership and control, they create a mental ownership concept. Because all the money is reinvested into the rickshaw pullers, it's basically for them. So that's just in general what it was. And they create an autonomy over decisions made. And so that's a picture of them receiving the loans. And product enhancement also helps them effectively run their business. And so that's the new and improved Saman rickshaw, which allows for advertising space, more legroom for consumers. It's generally a more attractive rickshaw than most rickshaws, so it provides more income. And just secondly, I think because of time, so assuming all the risk and rewards of a given business venture. So this was my most interesting finding, is what I found out was that Saman actually takes this role as for the entrepreneurs, and in the sense that they co-manage the payment schedule of loans. They own and manage production and distribution of the rickshaws. So they basically, they own the rickshaws. They get the loans from the bank, and basically the rickshaw pullers are paying them to give them the rickshaw, and then it's just a cycle, and it works very well. So they negotiate special low-interest loans, provide verification, assistance with services, and they add value to the product enhancement. And they basically take on all these risks that would usually be left to the rickshaw puller, which basically leaves them with not much options. And by taking on these risks, they allow the rickshaw puller to gain income and to form some savings to allow themselves to be lifted up from that poverty. So that's basically what I was talking about in my discussion. Just to look at this quote by the founder, who said, "It's simply too costly for the world's poor to assume all risk entailed with being the traditional entrepreneur." So that's why Saman takes on this role and partners with the rickshaw pullers as the entrepreneur, and allows the rickshaw pullers to rise out of poverty in order to later take on these risks, maybe when they're more able. So that was what I came to in my conclusion. Saman plus rickshaw puller equals entrepreneur. And so yeah, and we see Santos is now. He doesn't drive rickshaws anymore. He works in the office, and he does administrative work. So you can see where that program took him. And future for Saman has reached over 150,000 rickshaw pullers, as involved in urban and rural health initiatives. The government has adopted their model, and it's the first scheme of its kind and can potentially impact the country, because this is the first of its kind. And so that's just with the staff. This was just a church community that really helped out when I was there. And yeah, another glorified tourist experience.
I think at the end, we'll have all of them sit up front, and we can ask them different questions that you might have about their program. Okay, but that was really wonderful, David. Thank you. Next up, we have Bailey Binke. Bailey is a junior this year at and she's from East Lansing, Michigan. She is double majoring in anthropology and French, and she spent her summer in the state of Karnataka working at the Indian Institute of Science in the ecology department. Let me get you all set up.
Okay, so I'm Bailey, and I think from David's presentation, mine is probably the complete opposite of what he did. I was in a city for part of the time, but the rest of the time I was in a very rural village, working with wildlife, which was amazing for me. So these are just some photos. The one on the right is one of the elephants at the elephant camp, one of the elephant camps in the region where I was. And then this elephant on the left is a wild male elephant, and there's not many elephants in the wild that have that set of tusks. So that was really lucky for me to see that. So to start, I guess what inspired me to apply for this program and go to India, I've always loved Indian culture. I grew up in a pretty diverse community, so a lot of my friends were Indian growing up, and I always felt this affinity towards the culture and the religion. I studied Hinduism, and I just really loved it. And also, I've always loved animals a lot. So when I heard about this program, I wasn't thinking anything besides I need to go study something ecological and some animals. So when I first applied for the program, actually, I applied my freshman year. And I applied to work on sea turtles, and I never really finished the application. And so the next year I said I have to do this because there's never another opportunity to do this, and I have to get to India. So so I applied, and I actually, one of my GSIs for my biology class had gone on this program a few years before, and he had studied river dolphins, so he put me in touch with some Indian ecologists, and I ended up getting in touch with a Professor Raman Sukumar, and he is a leading expert in elephants, and he's just an amazing individual, and he's actually come here for lecture tours before. These are just some photos of a village and a temple, and this is the little downtown of the small village I was in, Messina Gudi, and then this was on a festival day at the bus stop, which was impossible to get a bus home after that. I guess what, let me just, okay, yeah, so just a little bit about the Asian elephant as a background. There's only so much you can learn from watching documentaries and stuff, but I read a ton of essays and scientific reports on the elephant just to kind of find out about its status and familiarize myself with the issues surrounding the Asian elephant. So, the Asian elephant is the largest land mammal in Asia, and it spans from India to the islands, and there's 3 subspecies actually. The Indian elephant, which I studied, is kind of the most well-known and has the broadest range, and then there's 2 other subspecies that are in Sri Lanka and Sumatra, and they're really amazing creatures. They're social animals, and they travel in matrilineal groups. So males go off on their own, but they recognize each other. They recognize humans. They're very intelligent creatures, and they have a really long lifespan. And they experienced major population deficits due to poaching in the 1980s. And actually, the region where I was studying, they had a poacher who was actually local there, who got into the poaching trade, and that really lowered their populations. So they've been endangered for a while, and their populations are coming back. And I think also what I found amazing is India is a huge country, and it has so many species that are endemic to the country, and they have a huge population that's always growing. So the fact that this growing nation that continues to develop and move forward in the world can still exist alongside wildlife is really amazing to me, and I think that's something that should be valued. So what I focused my project on originally was human-elephant conflict, because this is where most of the scientific research concerning humans and elephants comes from. And so in both Africa and Asia, there's most of human-elephant conflict is based on habitat and the fact that people keep moving into wildlife areas. So so elephants keep getting pushed back, and their habitats are becoming smaller and smaller, and also poaching, but that actually occurs more in African populations than Asian populations. So what I focused on was crop raiding, which is when elephants go into agricultural land and will eat crops or just destroy them based on how big they are and them moving through them. And this is obviously a problem because it causes a huge economic loss for agriculturists and their families, and also a loss of life of both elephants and animals each year, or elephants and humans each year, that gets into the hundreds. So I was interested in how that's being managed and how that kind of comes into play in these regions where people and elephants are living alongside each other. So I read a lot of articles about what work is being done in the region I'm in, or where I was studying, and areas surrounding agricultural land to prevent human-elephant conflict. So methods that have been successful and are not harmful to the animals or the people are elephant trenches, which you see up here, and I actually got to see how those are put into use because they set them up around the villages where I was. So it's basically just digging a trench so elephants can't cross over into human settlement, and then various kinds of fencing. And the Indian government will actually fund these projects under the conditions that the local people will maintain them, because those are ultimately the people who need them the most. So they also built solar fences to keep out elephants, which is semi-successful, but elephants are very smart and can actually go through them. Elephants learn from their experience and also pass knowledge down through their communities. And so they found out that using their tusks, they're not very good conductors, so they'll actually break solar fences and then move through them. So I think they need to figure out a better way for that. And they also have very good hearing, so they can hear the electric currents, and they've learned that if they can't hear it, they can go through it. So successful, but once one elephant goes through, they kind of pass down that knowledge. So yeah. And then there's also this thing called chili fencing, which has been somewhat successful. It just takes a lot of resources. So they've used it in northern India and also in Africa, and it's basically creating a barrier to deter elephants with a mixture of chili paste and dung or grease, and because elephants have a very, very sensitive nose. So this is a relatively low-cost way of keeping elephants away that doesn't harm the environment or elephants or people. And then in very severe cases, they'll relocate elephants, which is a much bigger project. And also they'll use like smoke bombs and things to try to scare them away. And elephants only raid at night, so which is a problem because you can't see them coming and you don't know when they'll come. So they have a lot of patrols that try and keep elephants from going into agricultural areas. And these are the pretty successful methods. And these are the kinds that are encouraged because a lot of agriculturists will resort to violent means, which is where a lot of the conflict comes in. They'll shoot elephants or even feed them firecrackers or poison them. And so a lot of elephants don't necessarily die in direct conflict from being shot, but they'll die in the wild due to these injuries. So that has an effect on the population. So where I was working, for part of my time, I spent 2 weeks in Bangalore, India, in the state of Karnataka, at the Indian Institute of Science, which is a graduate institute. There's the main building on the top right. And I was working in Dr. Sukumar's lab, and as I said, he's a very, very well-known ecologist and elephantologist. He's been working with elephants for over 30 years. He's founded multiple boards. So I was working in his lab, which was a really great opportunity. And his lab focuses, I think they have about 12 PhD students, and they focus on all different kinds of projects involving elephants, whether it's molecular analysis or population demographics. He's been keeping track of the same elephant population for 20 years where I was. So it's a huge scale project. So things such as that. So it really covers a wide range of large scale and small scale conservation interests that tie everything together. So while I was at the Institute, I worked in a lab for 2 weeks, which is basically just like working in a lab here. I mean, you're inside all day working with samples. So I think I realized I definitely like being outside a lot better after that. But I worked with 2 of his PhD students on 2 separate projects that they're carrying out. And these projects have been in the works for a while and will continue to go on. And they're not necessarily these big scale difficult projects. It's just what I realized being there is the amount of time and effort put into these projects just to identify something like whether an elephant is a male or a female takes so much time and effort and materials. So I spent my 2 weeks working for one with Sanjita and also with Ishani. And so what we were doing is we were using an ELISA, which is a scientific method of identifying proteins in samples. So what we did was we ran these assays in which you purify elephant DNA from dung samples that were collected, which takes hours. And then you set up this experiment where you're testing to see if there is a presence of this one particular protein called glucocorticoid metabolite, which is a stress hormone. So what she's looking for is to see if, as consistent with other research, elephants who are raiding crops are indeed stressed or exhibit high stress levels. So this research has been done before in India and also in Africa to see if elephants that exhibit raiding behavior are stressed. And what we found is they were. And then the other part of my lab experience was with Ishani, and we were doing molecular sexing. So we were taking dung samples and isolating a gene sequence found only on the Y chromosome to determine whether raiding individuals were male or female. And they are all male, which is interesting. Only males exhibit raiding behavior. So these are just some photos. This is a local market in Bangalore that I went to. And this is the juice stand that was on campus, which I frequented like 3 times a day. It was probably the best thing. I'm sure they miss me now because I gave them a ton of business. And this is the view from outside of my my lodging on the next part of my trip when I was in the mountains. And yeah, that's the back of my house where I did my laundry and everything. So the second half of my trip was spent at the Mudumalai Forest Sanctuary. So this was in the Nilgiri Mountains, which is kind of on the border where I was of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. And so this is a really big forest that it includes a tiger sanctuary and then a greater wildlife sanctuary where it has the highest density of wild Indian elephants. So that was an amazing place to be. It was a total change from the city of Bangalore, which is just bustling all the time. And the name of the mountains, the Nilgiri Mountains, it means the blue mountains because there are these flowering plants that produce blue flowers, and there's also a lot of eucalyptus trees. So the fumes, I guess they admit, make a blue color. So that's a picture of the mountains. So the work I was doing there was kind of took a change of course from what I planned to do based on a lot of restrictions. But what I was interested in originally was this idea of conflict and the people who lived there and how they came into conflict with elephants because their villages are located right next to and within the forest. So I spoke with a lot of people and some agriculturists, locals, forest department rangers, and I actually realized that conflict isn't really at the forefront. There's actually a lot of harmonious and peaceful interaction. And so the more I started talking to people about that, I just had a million questions about the cultural significance of the elephant and how it's tied into their daily lives. So that's what my focus turned to. And so there are 3 elephant camps within the area where I was, and these are government-run elephant camps. So mahouts are employed by the government, and it's actually a generational job. So if your father's a mahout, you become a mahout, and they are basically elephant caretakers, and they spend all day with elephants, and these are semi-wild, semi-captive elephants, and so they forage during the day in the forest, and are given supplements and vitamins, but are still allowed to breed with wild elephants. And this is the biggest elephant camp. It had about 54 individuals, and they were formerly work elephants, so that's illegal now to have elephants performing physical labor. But in the 50s, there was a project called the Kedu Project, I believe, which is actually driven by the government to capture wild elephants and train them and use them for work. And so a lot of the people in this area are from a particular tribe called the Beta Kurba, and so they, in those years, were actually the ones who would capture the elephants. So it's an interesting kind of transition from capturing them and not domesticating them, but training them and using them for work, and now they are their caretakers. So this tribe especially has a very deep relationship with elephants. So I spoke with a few of the mahouts, but they were really, really shy and didn't really like to talk to me very much. But this is one person that I spoke with. His name is Selvin, and this is the elephant he works with, Mudumalai. And his relationship with the elephant, what we talked about, was just, I mean, he's been around elephants his whole life, and they're such an essential part of the livelihood of the people in the area. So many of the locals are employed either by the forest department or as trackers. You can't go into the forest without a tracker. They're drivers because all they really have are Jeeps there. So if you don't know how to drive a Jeep, you need someone to drive you around. So a lot of their livelihood revolves around the forest and elephants. So seeing how important they were to each other was really interesting to me. So this is just some of the villages that are located in the forest, which I visited. And this is my friend Ekta. And we were on our way to go speak with people in a particular village. And that's just one of the elephants that was walking along the side of the road. So different perspectives of local people with elephants. So I tried to interview multiple demographic groups: older people, younger people, people who worked inside the forest, lived there. And it was, as expected, I got a really wide range of answers, but it seemed kind of unanimous that the relationship people have with the forest there, neither could exist without the other. And the government is actually trying to move people out of the forest where they've been for generations. And it actually has not been successful because they don't know what to do. If they move to a city, they don't know how to make their livelihood, how to exist without these natural resources. They get their food there, their work. They can't be cremated when they died unless it's wood that comes from the forest. So they have this really unique relationship, but the younger generation, from what it seemed like, is not necessarily more aggressive towards them, but I don't think they understand as much the relationship people have with elephants, and they aren't, I guess they don't hold as close of a place in their culture, which is interesting because it seems like more and more conservation efforts are becoming important. So that was kind of an interesting dichotomy. So this is a tea plantation I visited and spoke with the manager there. So elephants don't eat tea necessarily, but this tea plantation in particular goes through one of their migratory patterns. So they damage a lot of the bushes because, I mean, they're only this high and elephants are massive. And so I asked them like the kind of damage that's done and their feelings towards it. And surprisingly, they don't hold any hard feelings, which I found interesting after reading all those articles about conflict, because they recognize that this habitat has to be shared and neither can exist without the other. So yeah, this is just a tea plantation. This is the village of Uti, I believe, in the mountains. So one organization that I worked with and got in touch with is called the Shola Trust. And it's a local organization. It's really, really small. There's only about 5 people who work there, and a lot of them are young tribal men. And basically what their focus is to involve local people in conservation efforts and awareness, and make them realize that they're as much of a part of the ecosystem as the elephants and other animals that live there. So, yeah. And actually, they what they do is they do a lot of monitoring. So they'll monitor conflict areas, set up traps to see how many elephants are going through that area, try to handle conflict. They also have this very interesting project where they're making furniture out of this invasive plant species called lantana that is just taking over and destroying the ecosystem there. So that's something interesting. This is just their office in the town. So things that after this entire time in India, what I came out of with it was I learned so much more about elephants and the local status and significance of the elephant. And it's really, obviously it's really hard to convey that to you, but it was really, it was a really amazing experience that made me realize how special and unique this is, and that it would be unknown to so many people unless you went there and saw it. So I was really happy I had that experience, and someday would like to go back. I still keep in touch with people there. So yeah, and as far as a personal standpoint, I became a lot more patient after being there because nothing ever goes the way it should, which I think is it's a really good skill to have, and I think I'm a lot more, I can go with the flow a lot more after that. But I think I also realized just what I'm interested in and the amazing people that are there, and I definitely formed some connections with people that I will maintain for a very long time, and the people there are just so welcoming and amazing, and I would walk down the street and people would grab me and invite me into their homes for tea, because believe me, I was the only white person in a very wide radius there. But so that was just nice to see how appreciative and gracious the people were, and so I'd like to somehow convey that back to them. So overall, it was an amazing experience. I learned a ton academically and personally, and I would just like to thank everyone. So this is one of my friends in the village. This is me with an elephant. And this is a big thanks to the CISA program, everyone I worked with in India, the people I interviewed, just everyone who made it an unforgettable experience. So, thanks.
Great, thank you. Next we have Magdalene Kuznia. Magdalene is a junior this year in the School of Nursing and is from San Diego, California. She spent her summer in New Delhi and worked with a UM alumna, Jaya Singh, at the Colloquium College of Nursing.
How do I change this? I'm sorry, nursing school doesn't teach me how to use PowerPoints. Okay, my name is Magdalene Kuznia. I'm a junior in the nursing school, as Audrey announced. I studied HIV/AIDS patient care, really focusing on the everyday lives of HIV patients. So first, big thank you to the Colloquium College of Nursing. They did a lot for me. They took me to each hospital. I got to interact with a lot of students there. I was able to teach a couple classes revolving around nursing. I don't know how to repay that faculty. They were awesome. The Center for South Asian Studies for this program. The Singh family. Jaya Singh was my host mother, and she founded the Colloquium College of Nursing with her husband, Pradeep. The two of them and my host sister, Anya, and Amaya, the baby in the picture, they were incredible and so welcoming to me, and that whole family has taught me so much. Leslie Davis for introducing me to Jaya Singh. Jaya was actually an alumna from the Ross School of Business. She received her MBA here. And Dave the donor, thank you very much. I think we could all agree that we'll never forget this experience. And, you know, this short presentation doesn't even begin to cover everything that I learned over this trip and what I will carry with me. So, why India? Why AIDS? So I remember sitting in one of my nursing courses last year. It was around this time, and we were talking about AIDS and the epidemic, and how India is one of the societies that's very family-based, family-oriented, and you have one partner for the rest of your life. So why is AIDS so prevalent there? And I wanted to research different preventative and educational resources for these patients. There are a ton of people in India. It is packed, and you know, and even that is an understatement. So to think of a sufficient kind of resource for all of these people is pretty incredible. And then also there's a huge societal shift going on within India right now. Section 377 banned homosexuality within India, and it was currently eliminated about 5 years ago because Anjum Gopalan. I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name. I actually was able to meet her. She founded the NAS Foundation. Pretty incredible woman. She's one of Time magazine's in 2012 most influential people. And she took down this Section 377, so now it is legal to love who you love in India. So let me start off by saying that 84% of HIV/AIDS cases are sexually transmitted. So once again, we have this disease that could be transmitted in other ways, but it's mostly sexually transmitted. And if you have one partner, or supposedly have one partner for the rest of your life, how does this spread? So I, by talking to a lot of the nursing faculty and Jaya Singh and Pradeep as well, they talked to me a lot about husbands who are truck drivers, and they'd leave their homes for weeks or even months at a time, and they would have these urges and hire prostitutes. There's a decreased condom use in India already, so there's a high rate of sexually transmitted diseases, and therefore HIV gets transferred just as easily as anything else. So then the wife, when the husband comes home, they get back together again and they're reunited, and the wife gets whatever the prostitute gave the husband, and then the wife transfers it to the kid because, again, there's a decreased condom use. So not every time that they have intercourse, they have a child, but there's an increased likelihood that the child will receive AIDS if the father has AIDS and if the mother is infected. And then also the gay community, there's a huge stigma on the gay community, and it's very difficult to become employed as a gay person in India. So they rely on prostitution as a means of income and survival. So once again, we have these three target groups: women, children, and gays. So how do we reach out to these communities? I visited several different hospitals and NGOs, all revolving around, most of them revolving around HIV/AIDS patient care. Some of these were government funded, some of these were privately owned, and all the NGOs, again, privately owned, non-governmental. But I was able to visit some cancer patient care resources, Can Support, and then the Rajiv Gandhi Hospital were both cancer patient care related. And that was interesting to see. Jaya really wanted me to go see that because of the disease process being kind of similar. They both are diseases that break down the family unit. They both affect the rest of your life and the outcome of the rest of your life. So this is the community center in Narela. It reaches out to the villages of India. So about 70% of people within India live in villages. So we have these densely packed cities, but there's also many more people that live outside in the villages. And these community centers are one of the ways they reach out treatment options for these people. This is me at the NAS Foundation in India. So one of the components of the NAS Foundation is that they have an orphanage for HIV/AIDS infected children. And I taught them how to play Down by the Banks that day. And the picture kind of shows all the craziness that was kind of happening. I thought it was pretty funny. We'd all go into the room and the coordinator was like, teach them something. And I was like, I think they just want to play, That's really all I could offer here. But the NAS Foundation also has a women empowerment program, and then home visits for HIV-infected children, a school program where they go visit schools and educate children on sexual health, because there's a high rate of children dropping out of school after they reach puberty, and then counseling and work for gays. And once again, Anjum Gopalan started this program. It's the first HIV center or NGO in India. So the process of an HIV positive patient. Very similar to the United States, we'll receive our diagnosis from like a healthcare provider or a primary care physician. And then they go to these antiretroviral therapies, the ART centers, and they see a counselor, a doctor, and a pharmacist. And you kind of go through it in that order. The counselor, sometimes they save this position for an HIV infected individual so that they're able to talk about it with the patients that come in, relate on that level, and then provide work for somebody with HIV. And then you have the doctor who will take care of other complications that come with the disease as well. And then you have the pharmacist who will give them their medications. And you have to go into the doctor and go through this process every single day, and the counselor will record that you go in every single day and receive this medication treatment every day. And it is vital that you receive this medication every day around the same time, or else you have to start the treatment plan all over again, and the effects won't occur. And then the WHO started the DOTS clinic. This is, I'm pretty sure it's worldwide, but it's pretty prevalent in India because the rate of tuberculosis is really high, and this is a treatment center for that. So I visited a lot of DOTS clinics because tuberculosis is a complication of, well, I don't know necessarily a complication, but they come hand in hand together pretty well in India, because with HIV you have an decreased immune system functioning, and then with that it's easier to catch TB. So these are the counselors. This is one of the first hospitals I visited. That was probably my hardest day. It was my first day visiting a hospital in India, and it was a government-funded hospital, and it was crazy busy. You'll see it in the next pictures. And I've really only have been like a nurse or a nursing student at the U of M hospital, and I don't know how many of you have visited, but it's bright, shiny, and beautiful, and grand, and incredible. And then going and seeing these hospitals was really tough. I'm really grateful to be able to work in facilities such as these here, and even within the United States. If I were ever a patient, which knock on wood, I would like to have my own bed, like to have my own room, or even share a room with one other person, and that's not necessarily the case. So that was a little heartbreaking, but, they make it work. So they have these green booklets, and that's where they track how often they come in. And, yeah, sometimes they're saved for the HIV patients. So you could kind of see the line outside forming. That's the pharmacist who's going through the medications with me, the line of drugs that they have to take every day. And then right here is their documentation. Once again, U of M has computers, and they just converted to computers about less than 10 years ago, I believe. But this is their paperwork, their patient documentation in boxes in the side of a room. So, how much? How much does this cost? Government hospitals are free, which I think is awesome. You kind of have this decreased quality. However, people in the slums, the poverty line is about 68 cents per day, American cents. So the government hospitals are free. So if you live in a slum, you're still guaranteed health care, which radical, right? Private hospitals cost money, and then some NGOs are free or pay what you can. So where's the actual problem? I go to India and it's like, wow, I was kind of expecting people to not receive the health care that was needed, or like I just didn't really understand where the actual problem is, but most of it lies within patient compliance. So here we go. Education and motivation. The patient doesn't know about these services. They live too far out in a village to reach a hospital or to reach somebody with the knowledge to know that something's wrong. The patient feels hopeless. I'm going to die in a slum anyways. Why should I go, receive treatment for a disease that's going to kill me? Or the patient feels unsupported. My family doesn't like that I had sex before I was married, and now they kicked me out, and I'm living on the streets, and I cannot, I don't want to go into the hospital every day and face this dilemma, because that would be owning up to what's actually going on. And then the patient can't maintain a normal life. If you have to go into the hospital every single day and wait in line for 3 to 4 hours, how do you expect to maintain a job? It's just incredible. So we need to educate and motivate our patients in order to be able to properly treat them. So we need to know that patient expectations, their motivations, like what gets them out of bed every morning, what teaching needs to be done, what treatment options would be available for these patients. So how do we fix this? We have places like the NAS Foundation and Can Support who do the home visits. They reach out. Can Support is a cancer palliative care. They go out and visit homes. And then, again, through patient understanding and interaction, we are able to understand the patient better and create a better treatment plan. So this is the NAS Foundation visiting the schools. They split the boys and the girls up to play some games. And then they put on a little skit to teach them a little bit more about social interaction. In this little play, they had 2 boys kind of getting into a fight and how to deal with it. And they would rewind the situation and show better ways or worse ways to handle the situation. And at the end, they play out this game called netball, which they all play together, boys and girls, equal playing field, and kind of get comfortable with one another and are able to compete in this sport. And actually, the girl who's holding the ball right there, she travels around because she's an awesome netball player. She's on one of the competitive teams. She was so cool. And this is the Community Health Center in Narella. It's kind of like this dark little room, but it was a classroom, and 2 nurses were there, and they taught elementary school education and sexual health to younger children, and they were nurses for basically the entire community. So here you could see they were taught about nutrition and kind of about language and just everyday kind of things. And the nurse her role is to check everything out, watch everybody, and say, oh, okay, you look like something's wrong, let's take you to the hospital, or let's take you to the community center and get you the help that you need. So I kind of hinted at this. Who fills the gap between patients and their treatments? And it's our nurses. The nurses involve family in the care plan. I'm sorry, I'm a little biased towards nurses, but the nurse educates the family on the disease processes and the different treatment options. So again, like I said earlier, family is extremely important. So the nurse can tie the family into the treatment option and say, okay, so this situation happened, but we can only move forward from here. How can I get you to help your loved one move forward and keep going every day? And then even talking to the patient, how do I get you to take your meds every day? How do I get you to where you're healthy and a functioning member of society? And then also the nurse is connecting the patient to their resources. So saying, if you go to the hospital, if you go to this government hospital, you will receive treatment for free. It will not cost you any money. Mom and dad may have to work a little bit more at their jobs, but you can work every day. So, nursing's biggest challenge, they are not superheroes. They have to look at their patients without judgment. They have to educate others to do the same and create an example. And then they have to be up to date on all the treatments available. So in conclusion, it's not really all that different between here and the States, as a nurse told me in Can Support. So through my research, I've reiterated the value of interaction and patient education through motivation. This will promote healthier lifestyles for all. And as a healthcare provider one day, I really hope to get to know my patients well enough to the point where they feel comfortable sharing things with me, and I feel comfortable enough with them to get them to even better where they expected to be. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Magdalene. Next up, we have Dustin Hartz. Dustin is a senior this year and is from Bay City, Michigan. He is double majoring in physics and biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience, and is minoring in computer science. Dustin spent his summer in a number of different places in India, investigating the relationships between Vedanta and modern physics in India.
Hello, and thank you all for joining me this evening. Before I start, I would just like to say a quick thank you to the donor and to the staff of the Center for South Asian Studies for making all of this possible. All of these, the things that I'm studying, they're related to my research interests in neurophysics, as it pertains to further understanding the functionality and limitations of the brain and, of course, consciousness. This past summer, I traveled throughout India and explored the idea of how Indian spirituality, and perhaps more specifically that of Vedanta, can benefit scientific research in the realm of consciousness. I will begin by discussing what the goals of the project were. I will then explain the significance of conducting this research, describe my approach, and attempt to take you all on a journey by sharing some of my pictures and experiences. But before I do any of that, I will have to give a quick account of what Vedanta is. Vedanta is a Hindu philosophy based on the doctrine of the Upanishads, especially in its monistic form, although there are dualist forms and other variations that exist. The Upanishads are the philosophical portion of the ancient scriptures of India known as the Vedas. The goal of Vedanta is for the seeker to obtain direct experience of their own true nature. This can only be done via an intense and sincere commitment towards its study. Vedanta is thus known as a pramana, or a means of obtaining accurate and valid knowledge. According to Vedanta's description of consciousness, it is something which science will most certainly never arrive at because it is equated to existence and limitlessness, having no dependent reality whatsoever. This being the reasoning behind a monistic theory. Everything known to us has a dependent reality, and so the one true reality must be that all things are dependent upon that which is independent. This concept I've just described takes people years of study to fully realize. Now, it may seem from what little I've explained that this doesn't leave much room for using Vedanta in any sort of scientific context, especially in terms of explaining consciousness. And indeed, this was the initial concern of those that I interviewed. However, once they understood the goals and methods of my project, which I'm about to describe, progress was made. So I'll go over what were not some of the goals and what were some of the goals of this project. In conducting this research, I received many questions, especially from my interviewees, about what the goals of the project actually were. I found that an explanation of these goals may help to put the project into context. The term I could best use to describe it is pre-thesis research, a necessary step in approaching the issue of consciousness from a scientific standpoint. Essentially, I feel that most of the work that's been done on consciousness research has been more or less unsuccessful in providing concrete explanations because of problems arising from the scopes of subjective and objective reasoning, and the unique relationship that the nature of consciousness itself shares with both. So first, I'll quickly stress what were not the goals of the project, or in other words, are some common misconceptions that often come up. First is answering the question of what is consciousness. This is almost the equivalent of asking, why do I exist? Although it's obviously an important question, it's completely unrealistic to think that its answer, at least in a scientific context, can be obtained within the scope of this project. Of course, I see this project as a stepping stone towards investigating that question, but there's still a long, long way to go. So I'm sorry I don't have the answers to the meaning of life. Sorry. The next 2 points. To prove or disprove anything in Vedanta or any other spiritual theology, or to push the science and religion gap closer together, this is certainly nothing I'm trying to do. I don't want to take any sides in this science and religion debate. This point should become clear as I go on, that I'm using aspects of Vedanta to guide scientific research. The project was not to conduct experiments in a laboratory. This is a future step in the process, but I did not do anything like that while I was there. And last but not least, the goal was not to find myself. You may or may not be surprised how often that assumption came up. So what were the goals? Find a possible standard for future scientific research in this field. This is key to what I mentioned earlier, that due to the nature of consciousness and the fundamental complications associated with its study in a scientific context, the whole issue really needs to be approached from the ground up. And so perhaps a kind of standard could exist in order to guide all such research in the right direction. It's a tough goal, but I feel I may have enough information now to attempt this. Other goals were to gather data in the form of interdisciplinary opinions and perspectives and build a database of relevant knowledge and resources. Both of these goals were accomplished, in fact, to a greater degree than I had anticipated. Also, start the search for potential hypotheses to be tested in a valid scientific manner. Again, working from the ground up, this seems like a logical place to start, but when we're talking about something like consciousness, this gets very tricky. To be honest, although I had hoped, I didn't think I would actually come back with many ideas as to how to actually quantify or verify anything related to consciousness in a laboratory, but I was pleasantly surprised. Unfortunately, I cannot share the details of these possible future experiments with you all tonight, but the important point is that there may be scientific progress made thanks to the opportunity made possible by this fellowship. And lastly, to broaden my understanding of Indian culture and philosophy. Although this did affect my research in terms of understanding Vedanta, I believe, regardless of what any of us did in India, one of the most valuable takeaways for us as students was experiencing a new and different culture, as well as bridging research efforts between India and the United States. So you may be wondering, why study this at all? Furthermore, is it even logical or possible to do so? This is all subject to debate in the field right now because nobody really knows for sure. Despite its familiarity to us, consciousness remains perhaps the most elusive phenomenon of scientific inquiry. It represents a significant gap in our understanding of the universe and ourselves. We have an explanatory gap with dualist and monist explanations. The dualist explanation being that consciousness and the brain are not components of the same physical system. On the other hand, the monist explanation says that they must be, and in fact, everything that exists must be. This is Vedanta's standpoint, by the way. So it's a murky subject. Religion, philosophers, scientists, and cranks alike all have their respective opinions. It's about time some questions get answered, but we need a game plan. So far, we've been coming up dry, and is it even possible? Well, there's only one way to find out. So basically, many scientists believe that Vedanta provides a sufficient explanation of consciousness. Therefore, it made the most sense to me to use Vedanta as a starting point, seeing as it is essentially the best tool at our disposal. Coming originally from a physics background, it was my readings of the godfathers of quantum mechanics and such debates of theirs as the quantum mind-body problem and consciousness-causing collapse arguments which led me to start with Vedanta. Although not he alone, it was especially the work of the famous quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger who intrigued me. He outlined how Vedanta, for the most part anyway, was in line with what he logically deduced consciousness must be. Even Einstein, who quote-unquote believed in Spinoza's God, holds a similar view on the matter, since Spinoza's interpretation of God is very similar to that of Vedantic philosophy. So step one to this approach is to develop a deep comprehension of Vedanta, which traditionally requires years of direct, concentrated study with a guru. I will share in the coming slides how I managed to do this without spending that much time. Once I had an understanding of Vedanta, the following questions need to be addressed. Is it possible to proceed from Vedanta conclusions? Are there other aspects to be considered, and how can this knowledge be used? As I mentioned earlier, I was very successful in answering these questions from my interviews and got a lot of good data out of the process. I found that yes, it is possible to proceed from Vedantic conclusions, although not all of them, and that yes, there are many other aspects to be considered, too many nuances of which to name, actually. Now, this question of how can the knowledge be used is the fundamental question which makes all of this inquiry even possible. Obviously, in other cases of scientific inquiry, there is no reason to consider the knowledge of Vedanta, but consciousness is a little different. Regardless of what consciousness is or is not, its very nature requires science to use a different strategy, while still maintaining the robustness and reproducibility of the scientific method. And lastly, using this knowledge as a basis from which to develop testable hypotheses in the lab. As I mentioned, a strong understanding of Vedanta was necessary for my undertaking. As an American born and raised in a small town in Michigan, it's not exactly easy and far from typical to understand this philosophy. One of my mentors for the trip, an Indian physicist for the U.S. Department of Defense and a scholar of Vedanta, agreed to meet with me in Pennsylvania at an ashram there, which is associated with the one where I spent much of my time in India. I stayed there over the Memorial Day weekend and had some basic questions answered by my mentor and some of the other people that I met there. I was familiarized with some of the concepts of Vedanta and Indian customs and acclimated myself towards the impending culture shock. So this is where I went in India. The map shows a snapshot of where I traveled. My travel spanned 3 states, but as you can see, most of my time was spent in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. My interviews were largely conducted in Anakkadi, Mumbai, and Chennai. Okay. So these next few slides break up my trip into 3 primary segments, then list the locations I visited during each time period. My first 10 days were spent in a fairly rigorous course designed to introduce its students to Vedanta. In a similar fashion to my extra trip to the ashram in Pennsylvania, this part of the trip was also not specifically part of the research process and was paid for out of pocket because, as I mentioned, I felt it was not only important but absolutely necessary to have a strong understanding of Vedanta in order to proceed with my interviews. The courses were held in the mountains of Palani Hills just outside the village of Mangalapuram. The picture you see here is a view of the valley just down the road from where I stayed. I had virtually no connection with the outside world while I was there, save for the occasional phone call back home on a borrowed cell phone. I met some remarkable people. I had the opportunity to give a 4-part series of talks on topics in modern physics, and I developed as good of an understanding of Vedanta as I could manage. I also continued to study Vedanta while I spent time at the ashram in Anakkadi. But this is just the beginning. This is also where I met Surya and Nima, who were conducting the course and were also the ones who made my trip so successful. Not only did they teach me much of what I learned, but they arranged for my stay at the ashram, helped me determine who the right individuals to interview would be, and provided additional guidance and support. I certainly can't give this presentation without mentioning their very valuable insights and contributions. During my time here, there were many visits to various temples and holy places in the villages of Pumbarai, Tandikudi, and Palani, and a day of relaxation was had in the resort town of Kodaikanal. So I have a few pictures I'll just go through quickly. This is one of the sessions where we were having class. This was my sort of daily view, and the village there is the nearby village of Mangalapuram, which I mentioned. We went into the town one day, and a local school was having an anti-plastic demonstration. So this is a picture of that. And there they go. There's some more school children. They were excited to see us. This is a little roadside temple where we stopped by. During the trip, our bus almost got hit by this tree. It nearly missed us, actually, so we were held up for a little while. This is the village of Pumbarai. We went to visit a temple there. This is the temple. It's, I believe they said, about 3,000 years old. And obviously, pictures and cameras are not allowed inside. So it was a very special privilege to be allowed into this place, is from what I was told. This was a performance that we got to see in Kodai Canal, and we had a nice meal here overlooking the town. This is some people I met there. They wanted their picture taken. This is in Bryant Park. This is another temple that I visited. I visited a lot of temples. And this is a whole complex of miniature sites that you could stop at. And this is just the main one. And that is the Spear of Lord Murugan. I took this picture just because I thought it lined up kind of nice. And that the village down there is Tandikudi. This is a really big temple, one of the biggest in India, that's in Palani Hills. And these are the steps leading up to it. And this is as close as I could get to it to take a picture. Okay, so most of my time was spent at the Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, which translates roughly to the place where one lives with the family of the guru to learn the knowledge passed down by the rishis. In other words, this was an ashram where students from all over the world came to live and study Vedanta in Sanskrit for periods of 3 years or more. I arrived during the final month of a 3-year course, so the ashram was ripe with people to talk to. I focused on interviewing individuals who not only had a firm understanding of Vedanta, but also had a strong scientific background. Their professional disciplines varied between engineers, doctors, chemists, physicists, and more. The interview questions were very open-ended and designed to basically facilitate a discussion more so than get direct answers. But from those ensuing discussions, of course, came the most useful information and ideas. For example, one question asked about how Vedanta's perspectives on the nature of thoughts, the mind, and consciousness fit or did not fit into a scientific framework, and which of these perspectives might facilitate some form of empirical research. In other words, which of these perspectives, whose nature may entail or indicate the existence of a juncture with their corresponding empirical manifestations, could be scientifically verified, and how. With hour-long discussions over questions like these, I'm sure you can imagine how interesting the ensuing dialogue would be. Of course, that also depends on your definition of interesting. The picture you see here is a picture of a farm that was across the street from the ashram. They grew coconut and sugarcane. And here's a few more pictures. I got to visit a local school, which is funded by somebody here. Some of the school children here. They showed us a little performance they were practicing for the upcoming Independence Day celebration. This is inside the ashram, and in the back is that is the lecture hall. This was a ceremony they were doing at the ashram. Some peacocks. There were lots of wildlife running around. Another view inside the ashram. This is sort of across the street looking over at the ashram. Another picture, the dining hall. All right, and almost done. Sorry. The final leg of my trip had me traveling all over again, half of which was sightseeing and half of which was additional research on a related theme. While in Chennai, I stayed with my friend Shyam and his family, whom I met in Saylorsburg earlier this year. I had a chance to see some sites in places like Pondicherry, Auroville, and Mahabalipuram, a giant stone carving site, which I have pictured here. In addition to speaking with Sham, who has a PhD in biogenetics himself, he put me in touch with one of the leading researchers at the National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis as well for an interview. After a few days in Chennai, I went back over to the western coast of India to stay with Neeru, a student of Vedanta I met during my 10-day course at the beginning of the trip. Neeru was also an immense help to my research. She arranged interviews for me with some of India's experts in various fields pertaining to what is known as the subtle body, an aspect of many ancient world religions and philosophical teachings which is also of interest to me and may be integral to developing an understanding of consciousness. So there's just a few more slides here of some pictures, some of the things that I saw. The rock carving site, this is a meditation hall in Auroville. This is Chor Bazaar. It's a thieves market, kind of like a giant flea market. Found some really cool stuff there. This is a stepwell in Mumbai. This is I got to learn how to play the sitar, and this is the one that I was practicing on. This is a building that was outside my window in Mumbai. I could pretty much see right inside of it from where I was, so I thought it was kind of interesting. It's a house, not a building actually. 8-person house, I believe. Yeah. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. And here's proof that I was at the Taj Mahal. And Agra Fort, of course. It was great. So thank you all for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed your glimpse into my experience. Although there are only about 1,000 more stories to be told, this is at least the highlights of a truly extraordinary and life-changing experience. I would also like to thank the donor once again, as well as everyone involved with making all of this possible, and all of you for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Dustin. Next up, we have Courtney Green, and Courtney is a junior this year, and she's from Wellesley, Massachusetts. She's majoring in public policy in the Ford School of Public Policy and studies Arabic as well. She spent her summer primarily in Mumbai, where she worked for a child education NGO called Pratham.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thanks so much for staying tonight. We're really excited to show you some of the work that we've worked on and some of our amazing, just wonderful experiences this summer. So my name is Courtney Green, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience living in Mumbai. So a little bit about me. This is the awesome Taj Mahal picture, but this is quite staged. We worked really hard at this picture, so just wanted to make sure it was the first up. But with this, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a junior at the Ford School of Public Policy, and I am studying, before coming to Ford, I was studying Middle Eastern Studies and Arabic, and now my focus has shifted a little bit because I'm very interested in international policy. And going into my junior year, I knew I was going to be going into Ford, and I wanted to try and expand my knowledge of kind of American, Middle East, Near East, Southeast Asian, a little bit further in the relations, just because India plays such an important role with India-Pakistan relations, and I know has definitely been an ally and a lot of times for the United States, and just a wonderful experience to learn more about India. And so, let's see, what else? Oops, wrong button. Okay. So while I was there in India, going there, I'm very interested in kind of women's rights and women's empowerment. And so I wanted to learn more and kind of and create a project that focused on studying that and kind of researching how women are seen in India. I really did not know anything about India going there, and this was just such a kind of looking into this was it was just such a great opportunity to go and learn more and talk to people from India and see what I could gain. So then I found this NGO through a friend who goes to University of Michigan, Pratham, and was a child education NGO that had a lot of branches in it, and one of them was actually educating young mothers and seeing if that would improve. They're just starting the study and seeing if that would improve the education of their children if you educate the mothers, which has been shown in a lot of studies, but they wanted to show it in India. And then I really wanted to be an extra in a Bollywood film. I really tried hard with the flowers and festivities of in India, but did not find a film. Everyone said that while you're in Mumbai, this is, you have to try. They'd love a blonde Westerner, and unfortunately, I didn't stumble upon one. So I wanted to show a few pictures about my experience, because a little bit differently than some of the other students who went abroad, I did a research that was completely separate from my NGO, because I thought kind of originally for the project, I thought it had to be separate, and so that it was completely independent. And so I kind of just went on my own way and kind of started from scratch and learned a lot, but also learned how difficult it is to do research by yourself in 1.5 months in India. So, I'm going to talk about a little bit of what I learned, but also I learned a lot from just working in a large NGO. So on the top left is when I went into the field with my NGO, with Pratham. And they are a large child education NGO that was started in 1994 by Medhav Shavin. And he actually studied at Ohio State University, which is kind of funny, and then started this big NGO that's been very successful, and started this huge initiative of Read India, and where they try and create books that are of stories from their own hometowns and from all throughout India, rather than just kind of translating Dr. Seuss and for young children. So really trying to bring folklore and kind of stories that would be interesting to children to learn and encouraging young children to learn. And it's very elementary, preschool age children, and they've only started, in the last couple of years, kind of expanding it to help children. A lot of aftercare schools, because that was often a problem for students, to kind of help students to really move up and work through. So and be able to, actually the problem was a lot of students were falling behind in their reading levels and skills. So this was they really help support and try to bridge the gap of this education inequality that is a really big issue in India. And so, so that was it was a great experience to go to one of the more slum areas in Mumbai, but it was for me, it was a great experience just to see the women that worked in these programs. And some of those women that I was standing next to there had been working for Pratham for the last 17 years and working for a lot of work within the actual towns and villages. And it's such a kind of a grassroots kind of movement as far as how the work actually happens. You need these women in the communities themselves to put the day-to-day effort of teaching these children and encouraging them and finding the resources necessary and kind of reporting. And so then that kind of brought me to my job, which that's me in the office. It might have been a little bit of a staged photo, but that was the Pratham office in Mumbai. So it was very nice. And these were some of the young staffers that I worked with very closely, that a lot were Western educated, which was very interesting to me to see a big divide in the office, actually, of more Western educated. A lot of them had gone to either UK or America to be educated for their masters, had been educated through a lot of the private schools in Mumbai, and then come back and will work for a year or two for experience in these large NGOs to kind of see how administratively they work and really to give back to their community. And they said it was actually a pattern that a lot of their fellow friends will do, and I really liked to see that kind of in my age group. So I was learning a lot from them. And then in Pratham, I worked I tried to use and pretty much offer the skills I had, which was a lot of writing and editing, and I actually found that I really liked design. And so this was, I designed a lot of their annual and quarterly reports. And so I'm very detail-oriented and loved working with the colors, and they already had their formatting and their logos and things, so I could just kind of play around with all that. And I would use stories from the field, and I'd put pictures of the young children that they were teaching. And so I was the one communicating what they were doing to U.S. donors, because they have a lot of U.S. donors, very big names, and I organize, all of their database of donors. And so I was doing much more administrative side of things, because in the field I wasn't very helpful with my lack of Hindi. So I had to kind of work with my limitations, and still learned so much about how to run, how large NGOs run. And I think, frankly, I've learned a lot of office skills, and this was actually kind of more of my first real office work. A lot of my jobs in high school were more selling clothes and sales, and so this was just nice to kind of have a little bit more professional background. So to me, India was learning how to work with employees from different backgrounds. The other half of the office was from kind of outside towns. A lot of them didn't speak actually as good of English as I would have expected, and in this big, in the main office. And so for me, getting to know a lot of them, I think they really appreciated when I'd put the effort in to help. They really wanted to work on their English, and so we would talk for at least 30, 40 minutes every day and try and help them. So it was, for me, it was just such a good learning experience of kind of how to bridge those gaps in a work environment, which I think is going to definitely pay off, especially in my interest and field, where I definitely think I'm going to be working internationally or in an international company. So that was important to me. So with that, I'm going to just do a quick overcap of what my research was. So then I was interested in why, from the United States standpoint, there's been a lot of news on kind of the high and rising number of rape cases in India, and specifically a lot of reports in Mumbai and Delhi and some of the large cities in India. And so I was interested in understanding, well, why is there a raising rate and why now? And really, why is it getting so much coverage in the media, and what can be done? So yes, I'll go very quickly. Just a few facts, and I got interested in because in December 2012, a 23-year-old woman had been horribly raped and gang raped and killed on a bus, and she died a few weeks later actually from the injuries of the gang rape, and it blew up. And you see in India, I mean, there were protests, and I'm sure everybody here heard about that happening. And to me, it was just so intense, and I really wanted to understand why. And so, so pretty much and since then there had been kind of a string of rapes that had been reported on and been getting a lot of coverage. So what I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. So rape in India. This is a little bit of background. Rape is more common in India. So one of my questions was, is rape more common in India than in other countries? But official data in India shows that rape cases have jumped from almost 875% over the past 40 years, from 2,487 in 1971 to 24,206 in 2011. But a lot of people who are working in this field have said that's only the tip of it. That's not even really an accurate number of how much is actually going on. And so I don't know, I'm going to actually have to cut a little bit of this short because I don't want to keep you guys on. But I wanted to kind of switch more to pretty much I was looking into what is the problem, and then why, and I wanted to know what can be done. And so when I asked a lot of the reports, I was reading a lot of news reports while I was doing, in some of my free time after I'd finished working at my NGO, and I used their office, and they were fine. They would help me, kind of direct me to resources. And so a lot of the articles and a few of the people that I interviewed said that there needs to be stricter laws, and not only stricter laws, but there needs to be more women in the hierarchy, in higher positions in the security forces. So they wanted to see women as role models that pretty much that kind of will take more of the report seriously, and often the women will feel more comfortable in reporting. A lot of people also mentioned that there's a huge, of course, cultural taboo to reporting these issues, and can cost you a marriage and cost shame on your family. And there's just a lot of cultural issues surrounding that you could do a whole different presentation on. But that was very important, very interesting to me as kind of a Westerner, where it's still also the similar idea is a big problem here as well, but it's much more in India. And then, a lot of education awareness campaigns that are needed. And then I was also interested in kind of the role of media and how women are portrayed. I know that's also discussed here in the U.S. So I was actually able to get in contact with Lisa Mangaldas, who I ended up Skyping and having a Skype interview because I had already come home. But she was a Bollywood actress that actually came to the United States and studied at Columbia University, and is now working in Bollywood, in film. And why I was interested, she had written an article on how she had taken up a role as a rape victim in one of her films that she acted in. And I was very interested in how that, she was talking about how difficult it was for her to be in that kind of film. So it was, anyways, I just learned a lot from her and from her intake, and how she really believed that that Bollywood had kind of been emphasizing chastity and marriage a lot more in a lot of the films, and I went to see quite a few while I was there, which were a lot of fun. But that was definitely what I saw was very clearly emphasized, and so she's hoping that with some of the newer kind of younger generation of actors and actresses, a lot of these kind of social campaigns awareness campaigns will start taking effect from the top, from this kind of Bollywood world, where that is very much loved, in especially Mumbai, where I was. So, so I think I'm just going to go really quickly research. I did my research through surveys mostly, and I went to malls, and I went through friends, and I started at malls where at McDonald's. There's a big McDonald's in the mall, which was very crowded, and it was just funny because I was going there, and the manager came over to me and was like, do you have permission to be taking these surveys? And which was clearly a no. And so he is like, I'm going to have to rip these up and not give them to you, which these teenagers have been spending like good 20 minutes like writing a whole paragraph for my question. I was so excited to get all these. I was getting so many surveys filled out, and this was just working so well. And I was like, no, he's going to take all that work. And so I started, of course, fighting with him a little bit, being like, oh, you sure? Yeah. And then he's like, I have to take these. So he took the papers away, and I was like so frustrated. And the girls were watching, these young girls. I walk outside, being like, okay, well, now what I'm going to do? Like, I need to go print more and all this stuff. And then the young girls who had been filling out came running out with him and goes, give them to me, goes, run! And so I got my surveys and a lot of good information. I did not question how they got them from the manager, but I was like, I'll take them. And so ended up, was able to use some of those, and then kind of after that turned to an online, tried using SurveyMonkey, so I didn't quite have as much. But of course, it ran into a lot of demographic issues, of course, with the type of participants that I was getting. And so data-wise, it was a little hard, but it was more good qualitative data background about what people are seeing the issue is, and not necessarily very clear quantitative data, because it just wasn't representative of Mumbai Indian population. But it was a good start. I learned a lot. So this is just this is from the research. Is Mumbai? I started with very, very simple questions, and really basic. Is Mumbai safe for women? And so, which was interesting that. The 53% said yes, 47% said no, and this is only about 80 participants. So I was not, did not have a huge span of people, but this was just from some of the surveys that I collected. I wanted to see the difference between male and female subjects, and there's actually not a huge difference. Is Mumbai safe for women, female subjects? both of them were actually quite conflicted. So both male and female were, did not agree with the safety, kind of how they saw it. So which was interesting to me, that I would have thought there was a little bit more consensus about, if Mumbai was safe or not. So I think it really probably depends on the background and kind of their personal experiences. So I think I talked a little bit about what people think should be done, and and a little bit of what the results show, and I think it's just that there's a lot more research and study that can go into this, and I think that, there needs to be a lot more done through awareness campaigns, and I really hope, this has just really informed me, and kind of as I go about, if I want to do future research, and really kind of realizing that it's a really, really big issue, and there's a lot of factors and a lot of variables in it, that is kind of important for me to consider, especially as I'm going interested in kind of women's safety in the Middle East, which is where I'm hoping to kind of transfer some of this information and this this experience. So I'm just wanted to thank you, thank you to the Center for South Asian Studies. Thank you to Audrey and Zilka for, helping us get, this all organized, and really for this opportunity. Nancy Becker for kind of, turning me to this project. She was one who recommended that I should look into this and help me through the process. Manoj has been unbelievable. He couldn't come tonight, but he was really a mentor who actually was a researcher here from India. He's a researcher in science here at the University of Michigan, and has been great. To our donor, and really friends and family. There was a lot of connections that went into helping me live in Mumbai and Delhi, and I just really appreciated all the help, because it can be a little overwhelming going to a country you know very little about. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll hand it off to Audrey.
Great, thank you, Courtney. And last but not least, we have Saarah Anjum. Saarah is a junior this year and is from the San Francisco Bay Area. She is majoring in biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience. And she spent the summer working with the Narayana Healthcare Hospital in Bangalore.
Okay, so hello everyone, thank you for coming here. I'd like to take the time to thank our generous donor, as well as the Center of South Asian Studies, for making this experience possible. It was probably one of the most difficult challenges I have faced, but nevertheless probably one of the most rewarding as well. So my research was to investigate the burden of healthcare on poverty, but before I get into that, I'd like to introduce myself. So as I said, my name is Saarah. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. My major is biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience, and I hope to go to grad school one day. A little bit. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So a little bit about why I chose this project. It's actually a funny story. A couple summers ago, I would every Thursday wait for my father to come home from work, and I would be very upset if he was late, because every Thursday the Al Jazeera network would put out this episode of Indian Hospital. It was a documentary about this hospital in Bangalore, India, called Narayana Hridayalaya, where they are working to dissociate healthcare from affluence. This hospital basically gives people the chance to have medical care when they otherwise would not. Insurance there is about 22 cents a month for farmers, and basic cardiac care surgery would be about $2,000, which is a fraction of what it would be around the world. I was enamored by this hospital and so in awe, and I said to my father, one day I want to go there and I want to do research here, because it was so interesting. And last summer I actually did get to do that. So just to give you a few facts and figures about India. India is the second most populous country in the world, and its population size is about 1.21 billion people according to the 2011 census. And it's projected to be the world's most populous country by 2025. The promise of this growth introduces new challenges and stresses to the healthcare system in place. And while the medical sector in India is expanding, the needs of the swiftly growing population are not being met. And approximately 80% of healthcare costs are paid out of pocket. Healthcare costs end up plunging about 40 million Indians into poverty each year, and that's the sad reality of the truth. So just to go over a few of my research interests going into the project. I wanted to research how the practices of this hospital have changed the lives of socioeconomically disadvantaged patients. I also wanted to find out what the economic, caretaking, and emotional burdens that persist for patients and their families. I wanted to know what kinds of support are available to patients from their community members, and to assess the role that family takes in the healthcare setting. Last but not least, I wanted to illuminate any burden that the hospital takes on to provide care at lower costs. So the first step in my experiment, or my progress, my sponsors in India thought that I needed a perspective of what poverty really was. They sent me to Huskor, India, which is in the state of Karnataka. They sent me to the Biocon Foundation, which is a biotech company. This company has these clinics, as you can see in the pictures here, called ARY clinics all over rural India, where patients can go for about 10 cents a month and get primary care. And if they need any tertiary care, they are referred to institutions such as Narayana Hrudaya. The objectives that I had in this site visit to really understand poverty were to understand the structure of an Indian family and what takes place. I wanted to know what kind of support is offered to these families when they are in need, and also the kind of costs that are associated with an illness when a patient does or does not have a microinsurance scheme to support them. And so what I found from my time there was that families were very multi-generational. You found that children were living with their parents and the parents were living with the grandparents. And what we saw from that is that it made it easier for children to take care of their parents both financially and physically. But like any family, tensions can arise, and that make getting money and support difficult to come by. And when this happens, people have to resort to their friends, to their neighbors, to private money lenders, which can charge people up to 100% interest, which can be really devastational for a family. People found that they had to make the hard decision of taking care of their loved ones or paying, the price of this cost. What I also found was that agriculture made up about 70% of India's total workforce, and this held true in the state of Karnataka, even though the fact that the place was not very fertile. I found out that religion plays a large role in the lifestyle there. And it's actually kind of a gross story, but when I got to the village, the first thing I ended up stepping into was goat blood from a sacrifice that was there the day before. And the clinic that I was at, there was actually a temple, as you can see up there, right across from the clinic, where people would sit in front of the temple and just sing folk songs and sing about their religion, and they were generally very happy people. You might think that, because they were in poverty, they might be pitiful or unhappy or dissatisfied with their lives, but they really weren't. They found happiness with what they had. And I also want to point out this picture to you in front of Narayana Hrudaya, which actually was renamed Narayana Healthcare Hospital, very conveniently, because I think a lot of the Indians there couldn't even pronounce the name. So there's this sort of temple or this mosque, and one side is a mosque, and then another side is a church, and then from the back is like a Sikh temple, and then the other side is a Hindu temple. So you see that religion really plays a very important role in Indian lifestyle. So after getting my understanding of poverty, I drafted a questionnaire for the current inpatients at Narayana Hrudaya, and I asked them questions regarding age, gender, occupation, their role in family, education, community support, income and expenditures, and burden. So these are just a few of the questionnaires. The one on the left, it was for people who had a microinsurance scheme, so they were paying around maybe 20 cents a month to get their insurance. And then on the right would be a questionnaire that I had for philanthropic patients who did not have a scheme, but they were still getting aid from the hospital. So now just to go over a couple patients. The first patient I have here was someone who had an insurance scheme, and insurance schemes could be patients who are BPL patients, below poverty line patients, or if their employer could also provide them with a scheme. So this patient here is 61 years old, male, a retired bus driver. You see that his family is a household of 4, and there's one earning member of the family, and that was actually himself. his monthly income was about $100, but you see that his monthly expenditures were $250, so they were greater than what he was making. He stated his difficulty in attaining additional financial support during times of need as a 9, a 10 being most difficult, 1 being very easy. And what I ended up finding from the talking to this patient was that without the plan in place, the insurance scheme to really take care of him and his families, it really wouldn't have been possible for him to get the treatment. I found out also that he was the main earning member of the household. When he wasn't sick, when he was well enough, he would actually be the one driving his auto rickshaw around 3 to 4 times a week to earn for his family. And then the second patient that I'm going to talk about today is a philanthropic care patient. So the way it works in this hospital is that patients who don't have money come to the philanthropic office, they tell their story, and then they're able to talk to Dr. Devi Shetty himself, the founder of Narayana Healthcare Hospital, and he gives them a concessional package, which says about how much money they would have to pay. Patients pay as much as they can out of pocket, and I believe 30,000 rupees are paid by the Have a Heart Foundation, and then the remaining costs are covered by by some donors who graciously give to these people. So in this case, we have a 22-year-old female. She lives in a household of 7, and there are 3 earning members of her family. And what I found out from her was that she was sick, and she had her brother, she had her husband, and she had her father all taking care of her, paying their way to make sure that she got her treatment. And so you really saw the importance of the familial unit in this case. So just to give you a look at the philanthropic bleed and the burden that the hospital takes place, you can see from the green bars, that's how much money the hospital would be making if they took self-paying patients, people who paid all the costs out of pocket, who were able to afford treatment. The blue bars show how much the hospital would make if they were only taking philanthropic care patients or people with packages, insurance schemes, very poor patients. The red bars show you that how much the hospital actually makes. And what you see from this is that the result is that healthcare is made accessible to the masses. It's clear that offering this treatment is not very financially beneficial to the institution, but their core values of taking care of people, dissociating healthcare from affluence, and just, making sure that treatment is available for everyone are upheld here at this hospital. And just to go over my findings, because my study was very qualitative over quantitative, I couldn't make any broad generalizations about the study because it was essentially a case study. And but some general trends that I could note were that expenditure costs were greater than the levels of income. I found that private money lenders and self-help groups were not an option, often because they had such high rates of interest. It was just impossible for people to pay 100%, especially when they were making so little. I found that joint family members were the ones who were the predominant resources for people. So people were going to their family members, their cousins, whoever, to look for the resources for the care that they needed. And I also found that the lack of an insurance scheme or philanthropy equated to death. People would choose to live with their illness and their burden, and they knew that death was the only option for them. Granted, there are some government hospitals available, but what I found was to get the care there, you often had to wait more than 2 years, and in that time, you could be gone. Just to go over some challenges I had in the field, I did ask some very intrusive questions about their financial status and their families. And some people were reluctant to provide information. And lastly, my sample size. I interviewed about 35 or so patients and their families. And so to wrap up the study, I'd just like to thank our generous donor and everyone for being here in the Center of South Asian Studies.
So I wanted to take an opportunity. I first wanted to congratulate all of you guys, actually, for the work that you've done this summer. This is a challenging program, and I think you guys have all, I'm actually quite amazed at how much you accomplished this summer. I also want to take an opportunity, unfortunately Zilka Joseph just left, I wanted to thank her and Audrey for all of the work that both of them have put into this program. What I'm going to suggest is actually, I know I have a bunch of questions for you guys and want to get a chance to talk to you. I'm going to suggest that we all do that informally over food, which I can smell right outside the door. But before we do that, I actually was going to ask and provide Dave an opportunity. Dave, if you'd like to say anything before we break up and can have informal chit-chat together.
I'm hungry too, so this will be short. This has been absolutely great. I appreciate once again what the faculty and staff at the center have done, not just this year, but in past years. I also want to commend you students. You've done something which, when I was studying here, there wasn't the opportunity. Even if there had been, I would have been intimidated by the thought of going to someplace, foreign land, let alone India, I never would have done that. So I think, what you've accomplished is what I had hoped would come from the program. And, listening to you today, I think the sky's the limit as far as what your future is. And I think it's absolutely terrific. You have fulfilled my hope for the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. So everyone